Well, the protesters claim they are standing firm to defend the freedoms and rights of all Canadians. But do Canadians share their views? And what about the response from our political leaders? How are Canadians feeling about that? David Coletto is the CEO of Abacus Data and a frequent contributor to Primetime Politics. He's with me again this evening. David, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Look, let's start. Before we get into all the numbers, tell me about this latest survey. What do we need to know about it?
We completed this survey from January 31st to yesterday morning, interviewing 1,410 Canadians, representative of the Canadian population by age, gender, region, official language, and educational attainment. It's the same methodology we always use, and it's as frequent or as close a snapshot as we can get to how Canadians are feeling about what's going on in Ottawa and other parts of the country.
Look, everyone's frustrated with the pandemic. That's how Canadians are feeling, and the restrictions and the mandates. But the protesters say they're clogging streets in this city, honking horns and all the rest, and planning to move to other cities in Canada this weekend to what they say is preserve the rights of all Canadians. Do they have a receptive audience for their views and their actions?
Well, in our survey, a majority, 2/3 of Canadians say they have little in common and don't share the views of the protesters. So, if you use that metric, no. Most people would say, I don't agree with them. I don't see myself. I don't identify with these protests. And that's the view across the country, and it's pretty consistent in every part of the country. But there is a third, 1 out of 3 Canadians who say in our survey, I do share some things and the views of these protests, and that's not insignificant a size of people, right? 1 out of 3 is millions of Canadians who, at least in a small way, see some agreement, some connection with what's going on here, where I am in Ottawa, and you, Peter, and in other parts of the country.
And when you look at that, you've broken it down in terms of the parties they support. If we can go back to that graphic for a second, what stands out for you about some of those numbers when you look at party breakdown?
Well, I think there's the expected numbers are, Liberal, NDP, Bloc Québécois supporters overwhelmingly say, I don't agree with much of what I'm seeing from these protests. I don't connect. I don't identify with them. On the other hand, it's expected that those who voted for the People's Party, who really championed this in the last election, almost all of them say they do connect and agree or see common ground with those folks. The Green Party, I will say, we see a majority in our survey who say they see common ground or they have a lot in common. Small sample size, and I wouldn't make too much of that, but I do think there's an element of sort of this anti-vaccination, anti-mandate coming out of the Green Party. But the interesting one is the Conservatives, right? When you look at those who voted Conservative in 2021, almost half say they see a connection with those that are protesting, and about a similar number say they don't. And so for a party that has kind of come out as really in some ways, some of the members of that party have been not only cheerleaders, but supporters of those that are out protesting in Ottawa. They don't have the full support of their base. And I think that probably reflects some of the divisions in that Conservative caucus itself.
You also asked about the views of Canadians on the protests, and I guess some of the tactics and so on. What did you ask, and what did you find?
So we asked whether people felt that what they had seen or heard about these protests was appropriate and respectful, or was it, in their view, offensive and disrespectful? And again, we find a clear majority, 57% of Canadians think what they've seen and heard about this is not very good, is offensive and inappropriate, but 43% feel that it's been okay, that what they've seen has been peaceful and respectful and appropriate. Again, the same kind of breakouts by party and by region. As you might expect, Conservatives more likely to think that these protests have been respectful than those who might have voted Liberal, NDP, or Bloc, and the People's Party overwhelmingly feel everything's okay. So again, little tighter margins, but still the majority of the country saying, I'm not happy with what I'm seeing on display.
Right. Look, we've seen different reactions from political leaders, some dismissive of the protesters and their cause, and others supporting them or urging them on, taking pictures with them in some cases. How has the public viewed the response from our political leaders?
Well, I think the best way to sum it up is none of the 3 leaders we tested anyways, do you find lots of Canadians saying, great job, guys. In fact, in most cases, a majority or so are saying, I think they've made really poor choices or they've made inappropriate choices. They haven't acted appropriately. And that's true of the Prime Minister. It's true of Mr. O'Toole, who at the time that the survey was done was the leader of the Conservative Party, and Mr. Singh, who has less negatives, but still there's a sizable group. And it really depends on where you fall on that first question, right? If you are somebody who sees common ground with this protest, you're much more likely to think Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh have been off, have made bad choices. If you are somebody who thinks that this protest is bad and you have seen no value in it, then you're more likely to see Mr. O'Toole as kind of making bad choices. But there's also this group, which I think is really interesting, that says to us, look, we understand this is a really challenging moment. And there's a sizable number who say, look, they're not doing well, but they're doing as well as possible. And so there's mixed views out there, but really none of the political leaders are really winning kudos for how they've handled this. And I think it's frankly partly because how difficult this issue is.
All right. So what's the upshot in these numbers? What do you take away from them? What's the message here for politicians?
Well, we're coming on, not quite a week, but almost a week of this protest in Ottawa. There's talk of these spreading to other parts of the country. The vast majority of Canadians look at this and say, you've had your chance. You've said your piece. Time to go. They don't connect. They don't identify with what's going on. But we also can't forget that there is a sizable group. It's not a fringe. Like 1 out of 3 Canadians is as many people that voted for the Liberal Party in the last federal election, and they see themselves to some extent in what's going on. And I think as a reflection of just the sheer frustration and impatience people are feeling about this pandemic and just wanting it to be over. And it's now turning into outright protest and quite a number of people who are cheering these folks on.
All right. David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data. Always good to get your perspective, David. Thanks for talking to us. We'll talk again.
Thanks, Peter. Take care.